Israel has finally agreed to a ceasefire after 16 months of committing genocide against Palestinians. Just because the ceasefire is currently in effect does not mean it's time to go back to normal. Keep following the BDS boycott, keep donating to fundraisers and aid organizations on the ground, keep sharing updates. The occupation must end. And do not forget about the genocides in Sudan and Congo, which have been happening for over a year as well. For those of us who do not endure these horrific circumstances, we must do what we can to help. COVID is still here. It's still dangerous even if you're healthy. It's still killing thousands of people every week and infecting and hospitalizing many more. It can also spread from individuals who are COVID positive but asymptomatic. There's a vaccine for new variants that came out a few months ago, so now's a good time to get that booster if you have the ability and you haven't done so already. Bird flu is also becoming a growing concern now. Be careful about animal products that you consume and take precautions around birds and livestock. Please continue masking or start masking again if you've stopped. Stay safe. Hello, it's Rachel. So back in 2019, I had a friend who got really obsessed with the Untamed, and they were begging everyone they knew to watch it. I had absolutely no idea what the show was about, other than Tumblr stating that it was gay. And as someone who has seen Tumblr overemphasize representation many, many times, that alone was not really enough to pique my interest. The friend's recommendation made me put it on my watch list pretty quickly, but as I still didn't know any details, it wasn't really a priority for me. Over the past few years, every once in a while, I'd notice it on my Netflix watch list and be like, oh yeah, I should watch that. But then I'd keep scrolling, and I'd promptly forget about it. But back in late September, I was yet again scrolling through my watch list, and I saw the Leaving Soon banner, warning me that I only had a few weeks left before The Untamed would be removed from my library. As I figured I'd have a harder time watching it if I didn't do so through Netflix, I immediately put on the first episode, and I'm so glad that I did. So, firstly, this show was my introduction to Xianxia, and I definitely understand why the genre is so popular. I've been a fan of wuxia for a while, and then add in the fantasy elements, a genre that I'm pretty fond of, and I'm basically guaranteed to have a good time. I really love the story, especially the flashback portion, as I think my favorite section of the show is Wuxian's time in burial mounds with the remaining members of the Wen sect. It doesn't hurt that Wuxian controlling ventral energies with Chenxing leads to, in my opinion, some of the coolest sequences of the show. The Untamed dealt with heavy topics. I was shocked that atrocities like genocide were openly discussed. And it's also a deeply moving exploration of grief and trauma. I loved Wuxian's strong moral compass and his sacrificial nature, and that while he could be mischievous and a bit full of himself, his heart was always in the right place. I loved Wang Ji's deep sense of honor and watching his internal conflict between following the land sect rules or following Wuxian and his sense of justice. Clearly, I loved the remaining members of the Wen sect and their dynamic with Wuxian, especially Wen Yang and Wen Qing. I also really loved Wuxian's dynamic with Jiang Yanli, and while I found Jiang Cheng insanely frustrating for most of the story, so I wouldn't quite say I liked Wuxian and Jiang Cheng's relationship, I did appreciate how well written I found their dynamic to be. But let me get to Wang Ji and Wuxian's dynamic, because, let's be real, that's why this story is so popular. So, as I kind of implied before, I expected Tumblr to be exaggerating about how gay the show was. Again, I went into the show with no knowledge of it or the novel. I was expecting Wuxian and Wang Ji to have a deep friendship that people could read as gay, but that might not have been the intention of the showrunner and writers. And then episode 6 happened.
哎呀，歪了歪了，还是歪了！哎，
干嘛？
我只是帮你调整一下墨额， 你那么紧张干嘛？
木偶乃重要之物，非父母妻儿，岂能触碰？
妻子，
你笑什么？
我笑你们蓝氏啊，规矩又多又矫情，哪个女子敢嫁你为妻？打一辈子光棍吧你！
也好。
And I was like, oh, so people weren't exaggerating about this being gay. The writers are definitely implying that Wang Ji is gay. And then there's this moment later in the episode.
心上有蓝氏剑纹封印，他不攻击我，应该是感应到我乃蓝氏族人。这兔子头上为何会有蓝氏木额？
听说所有蓝氏子弟自小就要佩戴墨额，墨额认主，还有法力。怎么连兔子头上也有墨额呀？法力，墨额。蓝湛，墨额，把你的墨额给我！哎，快！
Wang Ji quite literally says that only family and significant others can touch the forehead ribbon, something Wang Ji clearly takes very seriously. And here he is, tying one end around Wuxian's wrist and the other around his own. That's pretty blatant. The writers literally link them together with the sacred lawn forehead ribbon, which, yes, it's due to fanfic-esque reasons, and because Wang Ji is trying to save Wuxian's life. And a moment later, they are talking to Lan Yi, and both agree to undertake the mission to find the remaining pieces of the yin iron. It feels as if the narrative is saying they are destined to be together. And shortly after this moment, in the cave, there's also this scene.
那我们阿宪将来也一定会娶一位才色双绝的仙子的。
我才不要，我只要留在莲花坞陪着师姐。
Both Wang Ji and Wuxian expressing disinterest in having a wife. Wuxian having spent most of the past 6 episodes desperate to become Wang Ji's friend and constantly vying for his attention. They're gay, Your Honor. Now, like I said, I don't really trust Tumblr's opinion on what qualifies as gay media. I honestly expected this to be about as far as the show would go in support of the gay reading of their relationship. But these 3 scenes, at least, signaled to me that it was the showrunner's intention and not just a bunch of slash shippers claiming that 2 characters are in love after interacting for 30 seconds. But thankfully, I was proven wrong again. There are so many scenes to heavily suggest their romantic feelings towards each other. And I want to mention some highlights because the show made me develop severe brain rot about them. When they are forced to go to Chishan to learn about the Wen sect, and Wang Ji steps in to protect Wuxian from Wen Chao. Wang Ji and Wuxian trying to protect each other when fighting the Zuan Wu of Slaughter. Wang Ji's repeated concern about Wuxian's health once he has started using Chenqing, and his multiple attempts at offering help, while Wuxian tries to protect Wang Ji by keeping his distance. Wang Ji calming Wuxian down when he gets into an altercation with Jin Zizuan. Wang Ji pleading Wuxian not to leave with the remaining members of the Wen sect, but allowing Wuxian to go because he is not willing to fight him. Their reunion in Yiling and seeing the 2 of them be so paternal with Yuan. Wang Ji begging Wuxian to stop the carnage at Nightless City, but immediately protecting him when Wuxian was trying to reach Jiang Yanli. Wang Ji chasing after Wuxian and trying to stop him when he was going to kill himself, and Wuxian forcing Wang Ji to let go so he wouldn't fall with him. Wang Ji saving Yuan and defending burial mounds after Wuxian's death. Wang Ji's iron brand on his chest, which, even though we are not told how he got it, is clearly something he did so he could feel closer to Wuxian after his death. Wuxian tenderly taking care of Wang Ji when he is drunk. Wang Ji giving Wuxian those 2 chickens, which is alluding to a Chinese practice that a man does for his betrothed. Wuxian trying to protect Wang Ji once his identity has been revealed, but Wang Ji telling everyone that he already knew and staying by Wuxian's side. Jin Guangyao using the threat of harming Wuxian to get Wang Ji to comply with his demands. Wuxian's face when they reunite in the final scene. And there's just so much more to support a gay reading of their relationship. The countless moments where they stare longingly at each other, the fact that they repeatedly refer to each other as Juji, and even other characters do as well, which basically translates to the one who knows you completely. The way Wuxian doesn't care when people insult him, but if they insult Wang Ji, a fight's going to break out, and Wang Ji reacts the same. There's also the fact that Wang Ji and Wuxian have a theme song, which in the show universe is written by Wang Ji, and that song is a duet between Zhao Zhan and Wang Yibo, by the way. Like, no, they didn't use the word gay, they didn't kiss or have direct love confessions, but it's absolutely insane to me that anyone could watch this and unironically call their relationship a bromance. Their dynamic is so achingly romantic, and the show did not go this hard when having to comply with censorship for people to downplay their relationship. They're one of the best romances of all time, and so dear to me. So clearly I was enjoying the show, but as I was watching, and especially after I finished and had some time to sit with the entirety of the story, there was a part of me that was deeply irritated by how the show treated its women. Jiang Yanli spends most of her story pining after Jin Zizuan, who treats her awfully, and then when she's finally starting to move on, he's suddenly interested in her. They get together just for him to immediately die, and then she sacrifices her life trying to protect Wuxian. Wen Qing is a super accomplished physician and incredibly smart and brave and kind, but her life basically revolves around taking care of her brother and Wuxian to a degree, and just like Jiang Yanli, she sacrifices her life to protect Wuxian. Madame Yu is cold and vindictive, and we're meant to hate her and feel satisfaction when she dies due to the Wen sect invading Yunmeng. Wang Lingzhao is jealous and petty, and she gets physically attacked by Madame Yu, and then a few scenes later, Wuxian uses Chen Qing to force her to kill herself. Ah Qing is an observant con artist, and she is blinded by Shu Yang as punishment for trying to expose his scheme to Xiao Xingchen. And then when she attempts to help Wuxian defeat Shu Yang, he kills her. Mian Mian is basically the only significant female character who makes it to the end of the show still alive, and she's there to be saved by Wuxian, and then later gives a speech defending him once the prominent sects start to turn on him. We basically know nothing about her as a person other than she originally was a member of the Jin sect. There's a handful of other female characters, but they all have minimal screen time, usually only appearing briefly in an episode or two, so I'm not going to go into detail about them. And while the misogyny is definitely my biggest complaint of the show, it isn't my only one. There's a reveal close to the end that Jin Guangyao is married to his sister, Chen Su, and the show tries to act like the incest is a worse crime than the fact that he's murdered people. Which, it's just so bizarre to me. Like, yes, it's gross and terrible that he put Chen Su in this situation, and it's horrific that he killed his own son to cover up the incest, but the act of being intimate with her is worse than murder? Huh? And it's also just such an unnecessary thing to throw into the plot, because Jin Guangyao has already done so many fucked up things, but the narrative wants us to think that this is the worst thing that he's done. Like, I don't know, I think murdering at least a dozen people, including your own son, to be worse than the incest. Also, the fact that he killed his father via forcing sex workers to perform sexual acts on him until he died is already so fucked up and shows a deep lack of respect towards sex workers. But then when you remember that Jin Guangyao's mother was a sex worker, it's even more disturbing and degrading. And it's just like, was there no other way you could think of to embarrass your father other than abusing a bunch of women in the process? Like, it just felt so gratuitous, and that the sole purpose was to shock and horrify the viewer. Which, I mean, I indeed was horrified and repulsed, but mostly because of how the sex workers clearly weren't viewed as people, and how disposable Jin Guangyao thought of them to be, given he ordered Shua Yang to kill all of them, except for Cece afterwards. This segment is just so gross, so let's just move on. Besides these complaints, I really, really loved The Untamed, and I was curious to see what alterations had been made when adapting the novel. I'm not going to lie, I was expecting the novel to be more misogynistic, that the gross unnecessary incest reveal was going to be in there, and that there would probably still be the anti-sex worker sentiment as well. And spoiler alert, I was right. So I did indeed go into the novel expecting to prefer the show. But good God, I was not prepared for what was awaiting me. So, yes, as I've already said, my instinct that the misogyny was going to be even more potent in the novel was correct. If you like any of the female characters in The Untamed, they are non-characters in the novel. Jian Yunli doesn't even have her first scene until chapter 56 of 113, literally halfway through the story. She's described as a good cook and very mild-mannered. She barely speaks, and we don't know anything about her other than she is very protective of Wuxian and is inexplicably in love with Jin Zizuan. Her speech defending Wuxian during the hunt at Baifeng Mountain is present in the novel, but that's about the only thing she does beyond a few moments of giving him advice or comforting him. Hell, after her death, she's basically never acknowledged again in the novel, unless Jiang Cheng is throwing her death in Wuxian's face. While her characterization in the show is pretty much identical, the show repeatedly stresses how important her relationship with Wuxian was, something that feels incredibly undervalued in the novel given she was seemingly the first person Wuxian would turn to for anything before he left the Jiang sect. Like, in the show, Wuxian is determined to grow lotus pods at burial mounds because he associates them with Jiang Yanli, and he misses her. He is so distraught after her murder that he kills himself. As much as she devoted herself to Wuxian, he devoted himself to her. Wen Qing's first acknowledgement is in chapter 60. She's a doctor and mentioned to be very respected even outside of the Wen sect, something we kind of get a quick glimpse of, but most of her actions are off-screen and later revealed to us through exposition. Hell, the scene where she asks Wuxian to help her find Wen Niang, she fucking passes out in the novel. In the core transfer scene, or even Wuxian trying to convince her to do it, not present. We only know about this because of Wen Niang's explanation to Jiang Cheng. It's just an exposition dump that had absolutely no setup. Like, yeah, I said earlier that in the show, Wen Qing is basically just there to take care of Wen Niang and Wuxian. But we also see her question Wen Ruohan's leadership and motives. We see her walk away from a romance with Jiang Cheng because she knows he is not willing to help her sect and be ostracized by the rest of the cultivation world. While I wish Jiang Yanli and Wen Qing weren't so self-sacrificial, they feel so much more fleshed out in the show than they do in the novel. Beyond them, I'm not even going to bother to do a breakdown for the rest of the female characters because they basically only appear in a scene or two, and that's all we get of them. I can practically feel Mo Xiang Tong Shu's lack of interest in writing these women, and that she's just trying to speedrun through everything that isn't either showcasing Wuxian's necromancy or a scene between Wang Ji and Wuxian. It's deeply frustrating and disappointing, especially since all the women feel so one-dimensional in the novel, either being a character we're meant to dislike and being characterized as cruel and hateful, leading to a violent death that we're supposed to be happy about, or being a character we're meant to root for, in which case they are characterized as sweet and kind, and most of them sacrifice their lives for a man, usually Wuxian. As for the incest reveal, it somehow felt even more gratuitous in the novel. It's brought up in at least 3 chapters, and the conversations feel never-ending. And the anti-sex worker sentiment is way worse in the novel as well. There's a scene where, as a child, Jing Guangyao watches his mother be violently attacked. So, that's great. Like I kind of alluded to, pretty much everything I had an issue with in the show, I was expecting to be worse in the novel, and indeed it was. Ignoring Wang Ji and Wuxian's relationship for a minute, let's compare the rest of the novel to the show. Obviously, the biggest change is that Xue Chonghai is the founder of demonic cultivation, and it's no longer Wuxian's achievement, as well as the addition of the Yin Iron, which, in the show universe, is the basis for Wuxian to create the Stygian Tiger Amulet. I think it's fair to feel a bit cheated by this change. Wuxian is very clever and powerful, which is exemplified by him creating a whole new type of cultivation in the novel. Meanwhile, in the show it comes off more like Wuxian refining a dangerous technique that already exists, but that most people disapprove of. I personally don't think this change is big enough to write off the show entirely, as we still see that demonic cultivation is taking a large toll on Wuxian both physically and mentally. We see on multiple occasions that his mood is much more volatile, and he also passes out from exertion regularly. But I do genuinely understand why people would be bothered by this change. Another big change is the show's structure. Instead of flashbacks being sprinkled throughout the full novel, the show takes the approach of briefly setting up the present before diving into the past for the following 2/3 of the show. And even if you don't like anything else the Untamed did, you are lying if you tell me that you think the novel structure is better. Like, I just refuse to believe there's anyone who prefers the novel structure. I refuse. The flashbacks feel like they are randomly thrown in, and most of the time I couldn't see a connection to what had just happened prior. The structure of the show is so much smoother, and a lot of the reveals feel way more impactful. Like, how did the novel reveal that Jing Guangyao is the villain before we even learn of how Wuxian got the title of Yiling Patriarch? We have no idea why Wuxian is hated by most of the cultivation world, and we barely even know who Jing Guangyao is at this point of the novel. We are told Jing Guangyao is evil, and then we get a little bit of vague background, and then Wuxian is spying on him and immediately finds evidence of his crimes. But no, tell me how the show sucks for clearly telegraphing that Jing Guangyao is evil while we're still in the flashback segment of the story. A third notable change is that Jing Guangyao and Su She framed Wuxian for Jin Zizuan and Jiang Yanli's murders. I saw someone describe this as Wuxian being an eternal victim, as there's always someone else who is actually behind his more objectionable actions in the show. And while I do understand how someone could perceive it that way and be irritated by this change, I feel like it makes more sense for this to have been a plan that Jing Guangyao and Su She wanted to further ostracize Wuxian over it just being a series of coincidences in the novel. In the novel, as Wuxian is responsible for Jin Zizuan and Jiang Yanli's deaths, albeit unintentionally, he is allowed to have bigger fuck-ups than the show allows for. But these are also 2 very traumatic moments of his life that he is burdened with the full responsibility of them. And I'm glad the show could alleviate his guilt for that. Although, let's be real, Wuxian still probably blames himself. I also don't really get a good sense of why Jing Guangyao and Xue Yang and Su She end up working together in the novel. Since in the show, Jing Guangyao and Ni Mingzhu have already had their falling out by the time Jing Guangyao infiltrates the Wen sect, to me it makes a lot more sense for Jing Guangyao to want to spare Xue Yang after he's brought to the Jin sect for punishment. And I might potentially be misremembering, but I think in the novel, Jing Guangyao didn't have any resentment towards Jin Zizuan like he does in the show. So it makes more sense that the show version would encourage Jin Zizuan to go to Qiongqi Path when knowing what would await him there. I also think this change makes Jin Guangyao more threatening, as he seems more like a mastermind in the show versus just a guy who kills a couple people out of revenge, and then everything else he does is him panicking to cover up those murders, or his incestual relationship with Chinsu. So, again, I like this change, but I understand how it could be perceived as the show sanitizing the novel. Most of the other changes come across pretty minor to me. Instead of Ni Mingzhu's dismembered body leading Wuxian and Wang Ji around, it's his sword Baxia. Wuxian doesn't try to hide his identity from Wang Ji upon realizing Wang Ji recognized him at Dafan Mountain. As I've already mentioned, the timeline of Ni Mingzhu and Jing Guangyao's relationship is reversed so that they have their falling out prior to the Wen sect's defeat, instead of that being how they met. Wuxian and Wang Ji meet Song Lan, Xiao Xingchen, and Xue Yang before going to Coffin Town, which leads to one of my favorite scenes when Xue Yang literally disguises himself as Xiao Xingchen to trick Wuxian. Wuxian's dynamics with Wen Ning and Wen Qing get more attention, and the show makes me believe that they were good friends, versus Wen Niang kind of just tagging along because he doesn't know where else to go in the novel. And then the teen years of the flashback sequence is extended a bit more in the show, which I love, as I feel like the novel kind of rushes through all the events prior to Wen Shao dropping Wuxian into burial mounds. Hell, there are a lot of scenes that are identical between the novel and the show, where the dialogue even matches. There is a lot that is unchanged or minimally altered. So let's talk about the reason why I presume some novel fans don't like the show. Wuxian and Wang Ji's dynamic. So first off, a version that 100% followed the text never would have been able to go public, and even if the current Chinese censorship was not in effect, I suspect the sex scenes would still be considered too explicit to be included. So, if we ignore the sex scenes, that already excludes the majority of the content that make Wang Ji and Wuxian's relationship quote-unquote canon in the novel. Like, the only two scenes I can think of that makes the relationship explicit and doesn't immediately lead to sex is, one, the first kiss scene at Bafang Mountain, and two, when Wuxian gives his love confession at Guanyin Temple. So let's break this down. I completely understand feeling bitter that we weren't able to see Wuxian and Wang Ji kiss. I also desperately wanted them to kiss because Zhao Jian and Wang Yibo's chemistry was insane. But I understand there were limitations due to censorship, and I've already given my spiel about the show having a Wang Xian agenda while complying with these limitations. I think some of the frustration comes from people having a hard time differentiating between queerbaiting and when censorship keeps a relationship from becoming explicit. I think sometimes it can feel similar as a viewer because we feel like the writers have been building up this relationship or for a character to realize they aren't straight, and then we are being denied seeing it come to fruition. But queerbaiting comes from a mean-spirited place. Think of Howard and Raj from The Big Bang Theory.
Both selective mutism and an inability to separate from one's mother can stem from a pathological fear of women. It might explain why the two of you have created an ersatz homosexual marriage to satisfy your need for intimacy.
Say what?
Happy now? I'm on a cloud. Swing me! Raj, stop! What are you doing here? Look, if you're getting on that plane because you love Anu and you can't stand the thought of spending another day without her, then go. If not, then stay here with the people who love you.
But what if this is my lost chance at marriage and family?
I promise you it's not. Believe me, somewhere out there is a woman who loves cooking shows and sweater vests and all the other dumb things you love.
Raj, you have to know you're a wonderful man. There are a lot of girls out there who want to kiss you.
Where?
You just have to look. Well, this was fun.
Or Lynn from Girlfriends.
I'm attracted to you. I always have been, and I thought you were attracted to me.
Miyoshi, you're a lesbian?
Yes.
Oh, well, I'm not.
Are you bi?
No. Now, the thing you might be picking up on is I'm a little freaky.
I mean, sure, if I saw Jennifer in a bar and I thought she was hot, I'd probably do her.
So it can't be just you and me. Fine. And you want to see other people? That's totally fine with me. You want to have a threesome with me and Baby Love? Okay. See? Fine, I'm into that. How about a foursome, huh? How about that?
I'm not a lesbian.
What?
Never have been.
Oh, thank God. I'm not a lesbian either.
Notice where the laugh track played during those scenes. Or, to move away from sitcoms, think of House and Wilson from House MD.
The healer with his magic powers. I could rub his gentle brow for hours. His manly chest, his stubbled jaw. Everything about him leaves me raw.
Psych ward's upstairs.
With joy. Oh, House, your very name will never leave this girl the same. It's not bad for an 82-year-old. She asked me to give that to her true love.
She's the anti-Wilson. She's a force for evil.
She has an annoying quality, perhaps even two. If I was perfect, I would date perfect.
You like that?
It's annoying, but she's good at it.
Wait a second. This isn't just about the sex. You like her personality. You like that she's conniving. You like that she has no regard for consequences. You like that she can humiliate someone if it serves. Oh my God. You're sleeping with me. Nothing you can say is going to change anything.
I love this man. And I am not wasting another moment of my life denying that. Gregory House, will you marry me?
Wow. This is unexpected.
Say yes.
I'm gonna go.
No.
You two, obviously, have some talking to do.
Or Betty and Veronica from Riverdale.
And gold, where dynamite will take you down and fight the fight. Woo! Go Bulldogs!
Ladies, where's the heat? Where's the sizzle? Well, you haven't seen our big finish yet. Don't freak out, just trust me.
Check your sell-by date, ladies. Faux lesbian kissing hasn't been taboo since 1994.
I will be transferring our powers to you via a kiss.
A, that's queer baiting, and B, won't your poison kiss kill me?
A, it's not queer baiting, it's saving the world, and B, pretty sure your phoenix power trumps my poison power.
Also, sorry for this tangent, but I swear to God if anyone tries to claim that Betty and Veronica's relationship wasn't queerbaiting because in the finale it's canon that Betty, Veronica, Archie, and Jughead are all together in a polyamorous relationship, that is a few throwaway lines after 7 seasons of nothing. Be serious. The fact is the show had actual canon gay and bisexual characters with Cheryl, Tony, Kevin, and Fangs, and the writers repeatedly chose to prioritize this bullshit instead of their actual canon same-gender relationships. Now, from this collection of clips, you might have noticed some patterns. When it's queerbaiting between 2 men, the idea that they are anything other than straight is something for the show to mock. If the 2 share a vulnerable moment, it's often quickly undercut with a joke. If it's queerbaiting between 2 women, the writers will find a way to fit in a kiss or have a character talk about a sexual experience with women because that's considered hot. But the idea of a serious romantic sapphic relationship is never even considered. Queerbaiting is inherently disrespectful and invalidating. The point is to reinforce heteronormative gender roles and ideals, to suggest that LGBTQ identities are something that should be hidden and never discussed. Now, as for relationships that weren't allowed to be explicit, think of Cyrus and TJ from Andy Mack.
Last night, when we were watching Andy and Jonah, you asked me, am I happy for Andy?
Yeah?
And I said, yes, I'm happy for Andy. But I'm also not happy.
How come? Are you jealous? Cyrus, do you like Andy? You like Jonah?
Puffy, I feel weird. Different.
Cyrus, you've always been weird, but you're no different.
I'm glad I told you.
Me too.
I didn't know Reed was gonna bring a gun. I wouldn't have gone, and I definitely wouldn't have brought you. Now you hate me. Classic TJ. Anything good, I gotta ruin it.
TJ, you said you were gonna apologize.
I just did.
Actually, you didn't.
Yes, I did. I said You're right. Well, sorry for not saying sorry.
So you've apologized for not apologizing, but you still haven't apologized. You can be a little annoying, you know that? Well, you can be oblivious. Well, you can be very judgy. Well, you can be intimidating. You know what else you are? What? The only person I can talk to like this. Okay if I say? What do you think of the shirt?
Whoa, I like it. For you?
Actually, I was thinking TJ. Will you hold it up so I can take a picture of it and see if he wants it?
It'll look good with his eyes.
It will. Sending. I hope he likes it.
He's gonna like it. Why don't you just give it to him?
I thought about that. I'm not sure how much he'd want that.
A free shirt?
Me giving him a free shirt.
There's a great way to find out.
What is it?
Give him the shirt. Maybe it'll mean something to him.
Want a ride? Well, someone learned nothing from his time in the system.
What can I say? I live on the edge.
Well, I live in the middle.
Cool. I'll drive you there.
What happens if we get caught?
You know what happens.
I guess I could skip a lunch.
Buckle up.
Thelonious Jagger? Are you kidding? That is a great name. I love that name.
You do?
Yes.
Well, my grandparents didn't. And they're like, that's a ridiculous name. We're calling him TJ. So I've been TJ since I was 3 days old. Is there anything else you want to know?
Is there anything else you want to tell me?
Yeah. Is there anything you want to tell me?
Yes.
Or Korra and Asami from The Legend of Korra.
So, when I was gone, did he tell you that we broke up?
Yeah, we all knew. Sorry.
That's pretty embarrassing.
Actually, I need to tell you something about that, and I should have told you this sooner, but while you were gone, I kind of kissed him. I'm sorry.
No wonder he's so nervous around us.
You're not mad?
No. Katara thinks a lot of this is in my head, so I've been meditating a lot. But sometimes I worry I'll never fully recover. Please don't tell Mako and Bolin I wrote to you and not them. I don't want to hurt their feelings, but it's easier to tell you about this stuff. I don't think they'd understand. I hope you haven't been waiting long.
Only 3 years. It's so good to see you again.
You too.
And I'm loving the hair.
Thanks. You're looking snazzy as always.
Come on, Mako got us a table at the restaurant. Honestly, after everything that's happened the past few months, I could use a vacation.
Let's do it. Let's go on a vacation, just the two of us. Anywhere you want.
Really? Okay. I've always wanted to see what the spirit world's like.
Sounds perfect.
Hopefully you can see the difference. I think Wuxian and Wang Ji's relationship is depicted with a lot of respect and care in The Untamed. There are only 2 scenes in the 50 episodes that I can think of that are played for laughs. The first is when Wuxian and Wang Ji finally manage to get out of the secret cave in cloud recesses, and Wuxian falls on top of Wang Ji because Wang Ji's forehead ribbon is still tied around the wrists. And I'm not immune to slapstick humor. I did indeed laugh at that scene. The second one is after they fight the Zuanwu of Slaughter, and Wuxian starts to take off his clothes and encourages Wang Ji to do the same because he is trying to put Wang Ji in a state of distress so he will spit up quote-unquote stale blood. Which, I don't love this moment, but I get that Wuxian needed the element of surprise, and he knows that Wang Ji is going to be horrified by this behavior. So, in context, it makes sense, even though I wish it had played out a little differently. But even though there are these moments played for laughs, they also have a lot of emotionally intimate moments that are treated with seriousness. And I think the show also does a really good job at balancing both of their perspectives. As in the novel, it feels like the reader has to fill in a lot of blanks on what Wang Ji is thinking, since Wuxian's internal monologue fills up a lot of the pages. There's also the fact that Lan Zichen picks up on Wang Ji's feelings and offers genuine support prior to Wuxian creating the Stygian tiger amulet. And after Wuxian picks up this new method of cultivation, Lan Zichen tries to guide Wuxian back to using his sword, as he fears Wang Ji following him down this path. Whenever other characters seem to notice Wang Ji and Wuxian's deeper feelings for each other, the disapproval stems from the fact that Wuxian practices demonic cultivation. Homophobia is seemingly unheard of in the universe of the Untamed. And this brings me to another issue I have with the novel, the insane amount of homophobia. Most of the characters treat the idea of gayness as derogatory. They voice disgust at the idea of Wuxian being gay, and they find the idea of anyone else being implied to be gay insulting. And on top of that, in my opinion, the novel honestly reads like queerbaiting for the first 2/3 of the story, but then Wuxian and Wang Ji are shoved into a relationship near the end. Yes, we have Wuxian's internal monologue where he sometimes talks about how attractive he thinks Wang Ji is, and once in a while he'll have a romantic thought directed towards Wang Ji. But until Wuxian and Wang Ji's first sex scene, pretty much any flirtatious comment from Wuxian or any moment of physical contact between them is played for laughs. Wuxian lying on top of Wang Ji to try to get kicked out of cloud recesses, Wuxian sexually harassing Wang Ji and telling other Lan sect members that they are going to get married in an attempt to embarrass Wang Ji, the scene where a drunk Wang Ji uses his forehead ribbon to tie up Wuxian's wrists, and Wang Ji shows this to the Lan sect juniors, the scene I just mentioned after fighting the Zuanwu, except Wuxian does actually pull off Wang Ji's clothes. It just feels very reminiscent of a lot of the content from the aughts, which, it makes sense given this was published in 2015 and most young Tang Shu grew up in the aughts. But some of this feels like it could literally describe a House and Wilson scene, or a Distill scene, or a John Locke scene even, right? It feels like the gay subtext is the entire reason these scenes are supposed to be funny. And personally, I don't really like that kind of humor. I also have to admit I find it a little annoying that some people put so much emphasis on the lack of physical intimacy as proof of Wuxian and Wang Ji quote-unquote not being canon. Yes, most television shows prioritize romance, and romance usually means kissing, but no characters kiss in the Untamed, not even Jin Zizuan and Jiang Yanli, which is arguably the next most important romantic relationship in the story after Wuxian and Wang Ji. That's done for a reason. Also, physical intimacy doesn't inherently make a dynamic romantic. Meredith and Christina from Grey's Anatomy regularly sleep in the same bed and think of each other as their person, consistently choosing each other over their love interests. And while their dynamic definitely could be viewed as romantic, the writers never play up a sexual component of their relationship. Otis and Eric from Sex Education confide in each other about pretty much everything, and do most things together. They bike to school together, they have sleepovers, they are dance partners. They are one of the most physically affectionate friendships I have ever seen on screen, and their intimacy is never played for a gay joke. Also, as seen in the clips from my explanation on queerbaiting, a kiss in and of itself does not equal representation. Context matters. There's also the fact that in the show, most of the characters are queer-coded and so many dynamics could be read as romantic. The two most obvious relationships after Wuxian and Wang Ji being Jin Guangyao and Lan Zichen, and Song Lan and Zhao Xingchen. But there are also moments that support at least one-sided romantic readings of Shu Yang and Zhao Xingchen, Jin Guangyao and Su She, Jin Ling and Lan Sijui, and Wuxian and Wang Niyang, among many others. While it's definitely understandable to have wanted a more explicit and concretely defined gay relationship, I do also think we need to allow for relationships to fall in this more gray area where it's not explicitly romantic, but it also feels deeper than a platonic relationship. I mean, hell, sometimes a person's romantic feelings aren't reciprocated. Sometimes two people are interested in each other, but those feelings are never acted on. Sometimes feelings are more complicated and can't be easily categorized as romantic or platonic. An explicitly canon relationship shouldn't be treated as the only way to validate a character's sexuality. While I do definitely want more content where characters are able to openly discuss their identities and have romantic and sexual relationships without the threat of censorship, the problem is not media that portrays LGBTQ identities and dynamics in a more coded and nebulous way. The problem is media that treats LGBTQ identities in a disrespectful way and mocks these relationships. But now for the biggest reason as to why I think The Untamed is the superior version of this story. As I've already said, a lot of shippy moments in the novel are played for laughs. Wuxian sexually harasses Wang Ji and touches him a lot at the start of the novel because he's purposely trying to make him uncomfortable. Which, the fact that Wuxian is the only character that is explicitly mentioned to be bisexual, and this is how he's portrayed, is certainly a choice. Wang Ji gets jealous whenever Wuxian is vaguely flirtatious with another person, and when he's drunk, he will even react violently if Wuxian is too close to someone else. Wuxian's love confession at Guanyin Temple is basically just him rambling about how he wants to have sex with Wang Ji, which just felt very juvenile and cringe-inducing to me. Like, why is this the thing that Wuxian is desperate to say when Jin Guangyao could literally slit his throat and kill him? But in my opinion, the most upsetting aspect of the relationship in the novel is seeing sexual assault being treated as hot. In the chapter titled Departure Part 1, Wuxian and Wang Ji have their first kiss. For context, Wuxian is currently blindfolded and he has been sitting alone by a tree, while other cultivators are in a hunting competition on Baifeng Mountain. Quote, "If not for how there was no killing intent on the person, Wei Wuxian would definitely think that they had hidden intent. He straightened up his body a little and tilted his head, looking in their direction. Curling his lips, he smiled. Just as he was about to say something, he was suddenly pushed forcefully. Wei Wuxian's back smashed against the tree. Just as his right hand was about to pull off the ribbon, his wrist was twisted back. The force was quite strong. He couldn't even struggle out of it, but there was no killing intent. Wei Wuxian's left sleeve shifted. As he was about to shake out the talisman, the person noticed his intent and caught him like before. They pressed both of his hands onto the tree. Movement stiff. Wei Wuxian raised his leg and was about to kick when he felt a warmth on his lips. He immediately froze. He suddenly struggled, wanting to fight out of it and pull away the ribbon, but he failed. He wanted to move again, but he somehow stopped himself. The two sets of thin lips turned from side to side, careful yet inseparable. Wei Wuxian hadn't even decided what to do when the soft lips suddenly became aggressive. Wei Wuxian's teeth weren't clenched, allowing the other to intrude inside. He was suddenly powerless. He felt that it was a bit difficult to breathe, wanting to turn his head away, but the other person squeezed his face and turned it back. That's assault. There's no gray area here. That is fully assault. 1, Wuxian has no idea who this is, which inherently means he can't consent. And 2, Wuxian initially tries to fight back, but Wang Ji pins his hands down so he can't do anything. Wuxian immediately freezing is not him being okay with this, and a handful of sentences later he's described as wanting to fight out of it, but it seems he is in the freeze state of a stress response. Wuxian again tries to stop the kiss by moving his face, but Wang Ji does not let him. And I just find it incredibly frustrating that the novel is trying to gaslight me into thinking assault is erotic. Meanwhile, in the show, instead of this scene from the novel, Wuxian and Wang Ji share this moment.
哟，蓝湛，听说你最近在云深不知处修家训，修得很是辛苦啊。
我研习琴谱，渐有所得，可以为你演示一下，看有没有效果。
蓝忘机啊，蓝忘机，我是你什么人啊？我的事情，你能不能不要管啊？
你把我当成什么人？
我曾经把你当作我毕生知己，
现在仍是。
Like, sorry, not sorry that I prefer a scene where Wang Ji expresses his concern about Wuxian's health over a scene where Wang Ji assaults him. A scene where Wuxian says he wanted Wang Ji to be his Zhuji, and Wang Ji says that he is. Unfortunately, in the novel, things just get worse from here. The chapter titled Longing Part 6 features Wang Ji and Wuxian's first time having sex. Wang Ji is drunk, and everything starts because Wuxian touches his dick while attempting to bathe Wang Ji. So, again, we're in assault territory. I guess the novel thinks this is okay because Wang Ji is the one leading things. But as far as Wuxian knows, Wang Ji gets blackout drunk when he has literally any alcohol, which, when you're inebriated, you can't consent. And Wuxian still makes the first move when he knows that Wang Ji is drunk. So, don't like that. There's also the fact that Wang Ji is really rough, and Wuxian asks him to be more gentle, which upsets Wang Ji. And before someone starts arguing that Wuxian is a tease, yes, we all know this. But just because someone is a tease doesn't mean it's suddenly okay for their partner to ignore their boundaries. Like, listening to your partner when it comes to physical intimacy is not optional. And we still sink lower. In the chapter titled Wangxian Part 1, Wang Ji and Wuxian have another sex scene where Wuxian is nervous as he's never had penetrative sex before, and Wang Ji just thrusts in before Wuxian is ready, which is concerning, to say the least. The scene goes on for a very long time, and Wuxian voices that it's starting to feel uncomfortable, and he asks Wang Ji to stop. And Wang Ji just ignores him and continues. Again, this is fully assault. There is no gray area. Consent can be revoked at any time, and that must be respected. And again, I know Wuxian's a tease, and the reader knows that his words don't match his internal monologue, but mind reading doesn't exist in real life. Like, listen to what people are saying, and don't assume you know their thoughts better than they do. Also, in case anyone isn't aware, sexual arousal can be experienced during sexual assault. The sensation is literally an involuntary reaction to certain stimulation. It does not inherently signify desire or enjoyment. This whole scenario drives me crazy because, at least from the way I understand Wang Ji, his behavior in these intimate moments is completely at odds with his characterization outside of them. Like Wang Ji, who can't stand the idea of Wuxian being in pain and is literally ready to unsheath his sword and fight people for daring to insult Wuxian, just ignores Wuxian pleading for him to stop. And I understand that this is supposed to tie into the Lan sect forehead ribbon being a symbol of restraint, and that Wang Ji is so repressed all the time and he just can't hold back when he's around Wuxian. But, like, that doesn't suddenly make boundary violations okay. Like, there is never a good reason to take away someone's bodily autonomy. That is villain shit. And it's very jarring to see a character we're meant to like and view as the paradigm of virtue behave in such a horrifying way. One of my favorite YouTubers, Kenny JD, actually posted a video around the time I started reading Modao Zushi that ended up being weirdly prescient to the experience. Kenny JD is absolutely brilliant, and she is far more eloquent than I am, so I will just directly share what she said.
Again, bleeds more into this conversation of danger and temptation, more about that like 4-point scale to understand what that means. And one of the wives, I want to say Megan, asked, what do you mean by that? Like, what does that mean? And this is what he says, quote, "If I was drugged and forgot I was married to you and I was in a back alley with romantic music, would anything happen?" That's the number 4 on the scale. What? What a strange scenario. Of all the scenarios you could pick, again, there's this like rapey undertone that seems to be the reoccurring thing for these men. I have a theory. This does feel very like bodice ripper example, yeah? Where women were not able to openly express their desire for sex, and so they would lean into a fantasy in which their desires are met without having to openly consent, so that they can experience the thing that they wanted without having to admit to another party or themselves that they are so lowly to desire this completely human thing. That's why there's so much of that in a lot of smut. There's a lot of consensual non-consent, dubious consent, all that type of stuff in that genre, partially because of this very like sex negative way that we talk about wanting and desiring sex. So this is that, just in gay. Where he's like, if there were an opportunity where I wouldn't have to admit that I'm cheating and I wouldn't have to admit these things that I want and I desire and I were assaulted, then yeah, it might happen. What? I would have this level of plausible deniability around it. And that's the scale that he uses. That's just like psychologically, mentally, emotionally.
This excerpt of the video really stuck with me, and it was in the back of my mind pretty much anytime Wang Ji and Wuxian had a shippy moment. But the further I got into the novel, the more relentlessly this clip kept rattling around in my head. And I think Kenny JD hits the nail on the head. Sexual violence is so normalized, and on a societal level, we are trained to view our sexual desires as dirty and repress these feelings. And then add in misogyny and homophobia, and it's no wonder people have a difficult time picturing a consensual, healthy, and pleasurable sex life. It's no wonder these harmful ideas keep getting regurgitated, and then when it's what you're exposed to at a young age, you internalize it as normal. Anyway, engage with whatever content you want, like what you want. I'm not here to hold your hand and tell you what you can or can't enjoy. But we need to acknowledge that the novel is quite literally treating sexual assault as erotic, and that should disturb everyone who's read it. The fictional content you consume doesn't exist in a vacuum, and you can internalize some very fucked up ideas if they're presented in a careless way, like it was in the novel. Like, if you do not see how Wang Ji's refusal to stop having sex when Wuxian is literally pleading with him directly parallels the Giselle Pellicot trial, I think you really need some education about what sexual assault is. And before anyone gives me the "I'm a survivor, I used it to cope" excuse, do you not see how this content leads to the shit being normalized and makes more people vulnerable to being groomed and experiencing such abuse? We cannot keep doing this over and over and over, where people act like harmful ideas and rhetoric in media have no ramifications in the real world and then it doesn't affect a person's subconscious thoughts. And while I clearly have many critiques and issues with the novel, I do think there are some genuinely good elements in it. I loved most of Wuxian's necromancy, and Mo Xiang Tong Shu is genuinely really great at writing horror scenes. I also think she did an amazing job with the world building, which is a skill I am very in awe of. But in my opinion, I think the show improves upon her initial idea and does a great job at expanding some parts of the story. Also, if you listen to me talk about this for an hour and you somehow haven't watched The Untamed, you should rectify that because it will literally change your life. Also, Wang Liangxian trio forever. Lucian has 2 hands. So, for the Untamed fans who haven't read the novel, were you surprised by all the differences? Does anyone want to share a differing perspective on the novel or the show? I would love to hear people's thoughts on this, especially because I had so many things I wanted to talk about and I didn't even get to everything in my notes. Thank you for listening to this insanely long video. I spent about a month and a half reading the novel and taking notes, and then another 3 weeks scripting this, so it was a really long labor of love. If you liked what you saw here, I have just launched my Patreon. I'm still figuring some stuff out, but if you have the means and would like to offer some monthly support so I can continue to make deep dives like this, I would greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to give me a tip, but you don't want the monthly commitment, I also have a Ko-Fi that you can donate to. Hopefully I'll see you again soon, and have a great rest of your day. Bye!